Hey there, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I left the car half in, half out of a weed-choked parking space beside a busted security fence, and didn't bother locking it. There was no key to begin with. I jammed a screwdriver into the column 4 days ago after finding it abandoned next to a collapsed bridge checkpoint. It had gotten me close enough. The marina was quieter than I expected. Not silent, but close. Wind through chain link, a loose halyard tapping against aluminum. No gunfire, no moaning, no smell of rot strong enough to sting my eyes. That was good enough to approach on foot. The dock hadn't seen people in weeks. Salt crust had formed over the concrete steps. Old food wrappers clung to the chain rail, bleached and torn. The slips were mostly filled with rotting sailboats and a couple of sunken hulls, but I scanned each one like it was a trap, looking for torn lines, movement in the windows, anything that meant a boat was already claimed, or worse, bait. I wasn't looking for a jackpot. I wasn't trying to play hero. I needed something sealed, floating, and quiet. Something I could take offshore and wait this thing out without running into anyone. The one I chose wasn't visible right away. I only caught a glimpse of the top deck through a gap between a rusted trawler and a half-submerged cabin cruiser. It was tied with double lines, no flags or markings, but the hull shape gave it away. Longer than most. Sleek in a way that didn't serve a purpose unless someone paid extra for it. Probably a mid-size motor yacht, 40 feet or so. I circled around to get a better angle and crouched under the dock edge to watch it. Nothing inside moved. The blinds were down, no voices, no smell of diesel or decay. I didn't rush. I waited another 5 minutes just staring. Checked the shadows, checked the water. Then I crept forward, knees stiff, hammer hooked through my belt, pistol ready. I climbed onto the swim platform at the stern and held still long enough to hear if anything inside reacted. Nothing did. The sliding cabin door was shut, but not locked. There were no signs of a fight, no blood, no broken glass. Just mildew, old salt, and the faint chemical tang of marine cleaner. The kind rich people use when they think they'll be back before the weekend. Inside, the place looked deserted, but intact. Galley on the port side, small lounge area on the starboard, cushions half covered with a throw blanket. The kind of boat made for comfort, not speed. The fridge was open and empty, power off. A few bottles of water were still in the cabinet, sealed. No roaches, no rats. Someone had taken their time shutting this place down. Then they either got stuck somewhere or never made it back. I found the keys clipped inside a magnetic box beneath the helm. There were two, one for the cabin and one labeled main. I turned both, and the breaker panel ticked. The battery system was low, but not dead. The engine tried to prime when I hit the switch. That was enough for now. I opened the engine compartment. The diesel tank wasn't full, but it had weight. 50, maybe 60 gallons. More than enough to push out into the bay and stay gone a while. I cleared every room. Aft cabin, forward berth, bathroom. No one hiding. No smell of anything recent. Just stale air and the buzz of a few long-dead flies on the porthole glass. The shower didn't work, but I could rig something if I stayed. The toilet was manual flush, no electrical pump, just a handle and hoses. I made a mental list. Water tank, check. Diesel fuel, check. Working head, limited battery, unknown comms. No food to speak of, but I had enough for a few days. First step was anchoring it tighter. I didn't want anyone cutting the lines and drifting off while I slept. I doubled up the stern and bow ropes, lashed a third across the mid-cleat for spring tension. If someone tried to make off with it in the night, it'd take more than a sharp knife. Once I was satisfied it wouldn't vanish under me, I dragged my gear inside and locked the door behind me. The sun was low, sky orange through the forward glass. There was no plan beyond that. No destination, no signal to chase. No safe zone to check in with. The power grid had gone dark a week ago. Cell towers were mostly useless, and the radio stations were either running automated loops or filled with distorted civilian chatter. The same kind of noise that got people killed when they acted on it. Go to the high school, they have food. The stadium's a shelter. Military's coming. I'd chased enough of those false trails already. This time, I just needed space, clean water, distance from other people. I woke before sunrise, stiff and half-soaked from sweating into the cabin cushions. The power gauge on the breaker panel was buried low in red. Whatever battery backup the yacht had, it was nearly spent. I flipped off everything I could find. Interior lights, unused electronics, even the freshwater pressure system. I was already rationing bottled water and had no idea how clean the tanks were. First thing I did was go through the galley again, more carefully this time. Behind a dry-gone loaf of bread and a bundle of old plastic wrap, I found a sealed container with hardtack biscuits and what looked like vacuum-packed dried fruit. There wasn't much. 2 days of food, maybe 3 if I stretched it. I had my own supplies, dry rice, half a bag of trail mix, 1 dented can of soup with no label. But everything together didn't get me far. That meant fishing maybe, or getting to an island. But for now, I had to get off the dock before anyone noticed I was here. It took 15 minutes to unfasten the lines and prep the throttle. When I fired the engine, it coughed and caught, loud in the morning stillness, but steady. I stayed low and pushed out of the slip slowly. Nobody shouted. No one ran down the pier waving their arms. Either the place was really dead, or I'd gotten lucky. As soon as I cleared the last pylon and passed the rusted fuel dock, I opened the throttle just enough to get clear of the breakwater. The city shrank behind me. The water opened ahead. It felt like the first time in days I wasn't boxed in. I didn't go far. 5 miles offshore, maybe 6. Close enough to still see the rooftops of coastal homes through binoculars. Far enough to avoid anyone without a boat. I dropped anchor and drifted slowly as the tide shifted. That first day, I kept scanning the coast, expecting to see smoke or people or flashes of light. I didn't. The water was glassy and grey-blue, full of drifting garbage and kelp clumps, but no infected, at least not yet. There's this idea that water's safe. It's not. It just hides things better. Noise carries differently out there. Footsteps become hull bumps. Screams don't echo. And the infected, they don't stop moving just because they hit water. Some sink, some drift. And I'd already heard stories about ones that kept floating, kept crawling, bloated and blind, arms still reaching even when their skin peeled off in sheets. That was another reason to stay alert. At night, I pulled all curtains tight, shut off every switch, and slept with a knife duct taped to my forearm. Second morning, I checked the engine again. Fuel was down a few notches on the gauge. Not catastrophic, but I couldn't afford to just idle all day. I killed the motor and let the anchor hold. The solar panels up top were too small to recharge the batteries fully. Maybe enough for a few lights or the water pump, but I needed them for emergency comms if I ever got the radio working. I spent the afternoon tracking every circuit I could find, mapping out the yacht's electrical system on a piece of cardboard I tore from an old wine box. No radio signal. The built-in marine transceiver lit up, but the antenna must have been disconnected or corroded. I didn't want to climb the arch until I was sure the bolts weren't rusted through. One wrong move up there and I'd be overboard, and that water wasn't clean. Not anymore. Too many bodies. Too many stories. That evening, while cooking a sad combination of instant rice and canned peas, I heard a bump against the hull. Not a hard slam, just a gentle knock, almost casual. I froze mid-stir, turned off the flame, and slid over to the window. Nothing. Then again, a soft sound, like something nudging the boat or brushing past it with no real urgency. I grabbed the boat hook and went out back. The sun was low, water orange and rippled. At first I didn't see anything. Then the swell shifted. Something pale surfaced near the stern. Bloated. A body, drifting face down, shirt torn, skin gone soft and torn at the joints. Male, maybe 20s or 30s. Couldn't tell. His arm tapped the hull gently as he rolled in the water, then turned just enough for one side of his face to clear the surface. The eye was gone. The other was clouded and still open. I didn't poke it. Didn't touch anything. I watched for movement. Twitch, grab, shift in posture. Nothing. Just a dead man in a life jacket, drifting on the tide. Probably someone who thought water was safe too. I waited until he drifted past the bow and cleared the anchor line before I turned away. I didn't want to kill whatever still clung to the idea of this being a clean place. The nights kept getting quieter, not in a comforting way, more like the world was holding its breath. The hum of distant traffic never came back. No aircraft, no overhead lights from towns on the shore. The power grid was either failing in pieces, or the people running it were already gone. On day 3, I saw smoke rising from a place that should have been a state park. On day 4, I spotted someone paddling a half-inflated kayak, but I stayed low and watched from behind the curtains. He never looked up, just kept paddling until the sun swallowed him from sight. Food ran thin by the end of the week. I rigged a line and tried fishing off the stern, using broken bits of biscuit as bait. Caught nothing but weeds. Twice something pulled the hook clean off. Third time, the line snapped entirely. I found a small cast net under the bench storage, probably meant for kids to use on shrimp, and spent an hour trying to catch anything edible in the shallows around a kelp patch I drifted near. Came up with a crab the size of my fist and a plastic bottle full of dead ants. The crab tasted like salt and ammonia, but I ate it anyway. Boiled it twice just to be sure. I was down to my last meal pack by day 10. That's when I started checking the forward bilge more seriously. I hadn't touched it earlier, didn't want to find anything that would push me off the boat. But I had to be sure. If there was anything left down there, more storage, a hidden compartment, extra gear, I needed it. I pulled up the hatch cover and crawled inside with a flashlight rigged to my wrist. The space was narrow, hot, and thick with condensation. Mold climbed the insulation wrap. I pushed past an old box fan, a folded tarp, a bundle of lines I didn't need. Then I saw the hatch panel at the rear bulkhead. Someone had taped it shut. 3 layers of duct tape across the seams, with something scribbled in faded marker. Do not open. I didn't open it that day. I backed out slowly, resealed the hatch, and sat on the floor staring at nothing for almost 30 minutes. I didn't want to imagine what someone would seal off in a place like that. No smell though, no rot, just a message and a choice I wasn't ready to make. I tried to forget about it, or at least put it lower on the list, but I couldn't. Once I knew it was there, taped off and labeled in somebody's shaky hand, it settled into the back of my thoughts like a weight on the wrong side of the hull. I kept checking the rest of the yacht compulsively, like if I kept everything else in order, I wouldn't have to deal with what might be behind that panel. Every drawer, every bin, every hinge. I resealed the windows, rechecked the manual bilge pumps, mapped out a water filtration rig using parts from the sink, and a spare filter I'd been carrying since the gas station raid in mid-June. I kept busy for 3 days straight. I told myself I'd open it on day 14. If I was still alive, and the boat hadn't started sinking or caught fire or gotten swarmed, I'd open it. That gave me time to stock up food, test the radio again, maybe try to pull in a distress call from someone who knew what kind of thing gets sealed in an emergency compartment with no sign of mechanical purpose. I went through the yacht's manuals and safety instructions, but they didn't even show that panel. The blueprint stopped at the waterline systems. If it was original, someone had gone out of their way to hide it. Day 11 was calm. The sea was flat. No boats passed. I got a solar shower set up by rigging a black bag on the radar arch and letting it bake through the day. The water came out lukewarm and full of plastic taste, but it was the first real rinse I'd had in nearly 2 weeks. I shaved with an old razor I found in a drawer and didn't recognize my own face for a few seconds. I looked thinner, angrier. The whites of my eyes had turned a little yellow. Could have been dehydration, could have been nothing. Fishing wasn't going well. I tried netting near a drift line but only caught debris. A torn poncho, some tangled monoline, and the rear half of a busted child's sandal. No sign of other survivors, at least not alive ones. I saw a capsized sailboat on the horizon, bobbing without sails, and watched it through binoculars for a full hour before deciding not to check it. Too risky, too far. If it was a trap, I had no backup. If it wasn't, there was nothing on it I needed enough to swim for. On day 12, I saw the first real sign of infection offshore. It came with the tide, just after dawn. A lifeboat, one of those hard-shell, bright orange commercial types. It drifted slowly toward the yacht, bobbing awkwardly on the chop, no visible markings, no sounds. I considered firing the engine and steering clear, but curiosity pinned me in place. I watched it for nearly 20 minutes as it crept closer. When it finally nudged the side of the hull, I looped a line around one of the railings and climbed down to meet it. There were no people inside, just rags, stained blankets, and a dried smear of something on the inner wall that I didn't bother testing. The worst part was the smell. Not strong, just wrong. Not decay, not sewage. More like something old that had burned, and then gone wet again. I found a duffel bag in the footwell and opened it cautiously. Waterlogged food packs, all expired. 2 small gas canisters, a bent but functional water filter, and a notebook, sealed in a freezer bag, with 30 pages torn out. The pages that remained were mostly smeared. A few legible lines mentioned quarantine, numbers that looked like patient IDs, and one sentence I kept going back to: he stayed quiet for 2 days after dying. That notebook went straight into a dry bin. I dumped the rest overboard, including the gas. The seal had been broken and I didn't trust it. I cut the raft loose and let the tide carry it away. I thought about the line in the notebook again later that night, while checking the battery charge in the forward panel. He stayed quiet, not he died. That part was written like a footnote. Day 13 was windy, sky overcast, choppy water with no fish activity. I stayed inside most of the day, eating the last of the fruit pouches and slicing mold off a biscuit I should have thrown out a week ago. I read the notebook again, skimmed every word, looking for clues. It didn't read like a journal, more like field notes. Medical maybe, observational. But if someone was documenting infected behavior, why end up sealed in a drifting raft with no comms, no flares, and nothing but scavenged food? That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for day 14. I got the crowbar from the engine compartment, sharpened the end on the deck rail for leverage, and brought a headlamp and spare battery just in case the flashlight failed. I didn't eat dinner. My stomach felt tight the whole time. The hatch in the bilge was taped tight, but the seal gave with some effort. Whoever had wrapped it hadn't used marine tape, just standard duct tape, layered unevenly. Once it was peeled off, I found 6 screws and a rubber gasket edge. I removed the screws one by one. The hatch didn't creak. It came away smooth and quiet, revealing a small recessed space no bigger than a storage locker. Inside was a sealed duffel, a gun case, and a body bag. The duffel came first. I hauled it out and unzipped it cautiously. It was filled with vacuum-sealed packages, food, water, even emergency rations with military print. American issue. Most dated the year before the outbreak. Someone had been prepping this place. The gun case was locked, but I cracked it open with the crowbar. Inside was a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and 4 boxes of shells, all marked with orange tape. Slugs, not buckshot, good for stopping something large or something coming at you on a narrow path. Then there was the body bag. It wasn't zipped shut, just folded over once and tucked. I stood over it for nearly a full minute before reaching in. The air in the bilge was damp but not cold. There was no smell. I peeled the bag open and found what I expected. A corpse. Male, maybe late 40s, wearing a grey polo shirt and dock pants. No shoes. Wrists zip-tied in front. Black bruising around the eyes. His lips were blue, and his skin was tight. Not fresh, but not bloated. He hadn't been dead long when they put him here. But that wasn't what froze me. His head had been wrapped in plastic film, double-layered, taped down at the neck, like someone wanted to be sure nothing got out, or in. I resealed the bag without looking any further and sat on the cabin floor for over an hour. I didn't touch the food. I didn't load the shotgun. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there trying to piece together who would do that and what it meant. If he was infected, why not dump him? If he wasn't, why wrap the head? And who sealed all this up and walked away? That night, I didn't sleep. I locked the cabin door from the inside and stayed up with the shotgun across my lap. I kept thinking I heard sounds under the floor. I checked twice. Nothing had moved. The bilge was dry. The hatch was back in place. But my ears wouldn't settle. I watched the anchor rope sway in the moonlight. barely visible through the forward glass. My hand cramped from keeping the shotgun gripped too long, but I didn't let go. I'd been through close calls before. Cities falling apart, roadblocks turning into slaughter zones, camps going up in flames. But this was different. There was no one screaming, no one barking orders, just the water, calm and steady, and the possibility that something had survived sealed up below. Not just a man, not just a corpse, something that might have taken longer to stop moving than anyone wanted to believe. When dawn broke, I felt stupid. My arms were sore, my eyes burned. Nothing had come through the hatch. Nothing had scratched, growled, or even shifted. I told myself it was exhaustion, paranoia after too many days without people, real food, or sleep you didn't have to earn. I opened the door, set the shotgun down gently, and made the mistake of looking back toward the bilge access panel before I finished turning the lights on. I froze. Not because the hatch was open, it wasn't, but because the condensation around the edge had wiped clean, like someone had touched it. I crouched and ran my fingers along the floor. Dry, but the air was thicker than before, humid in a way that didn't match the morning chill. I rechecked the bilge, one hand gripping a wrench. Still sealed, still bolted tight. The corpse hadn't moved. The tape on the plastic around the man's head was intact. I sealed it again, backed out, and climbed up top just to breathe. The sea was flat, dead calm, the kind of flat that feels wrong after a week of chop. I could see oil slicks stretched thin across the surface, signs of long dead engines. No birds, no fish breaking the surface, just endless grey water and the faint outline of the mainland, way off behind me. I'd pushed farther than I'd meant to. My guess was 20 or 25 miles out. The depth gauge said I was over a trench. No bottom readout, just 3 dashes, too deep to anchor properly. I'd drifted most of the night without realizing it. I cut the engine and drifted longer, hoping the solar panels had trickled enough power into the batteries to at least kick the inverter on. They hadn't. The charge light blinked yellow, then dropped to red. I was running out of options. The food from the sealed duffel was still good, but not infinite. The water had to be rationed tighter. The fishing line hadn't produced anything since that first crab. I started checking storm drains in the deck for rain collection. Nothing useful. I hadn't seen clouds in days. By noon, I gave up on pretending it was fine. I'd burned too much diesel just trying to run from a sealed hatch and my own nerves. I laid out a fresh ration plan on the back of the same wine box I'd used to sketch the electrical system. 5 days of food if I stretched it. 7 if I cut out breakfast entirely and got protein only every other day. Water was worse. Maybe 3 gallons left. I dug out the hand pump filter and considered trying to distill seawater with the small camping rig I'd never tested. It wasn't meant for long-term use. The seals were going. Late afternoon, I tried the radio again. Still static. I swept all marine bands twice, then every emergency band I knew, and finally just sat there rotating the dial hoping to hear something that wasn't distortion. Nothing. Even the weather broadcasts were gone. Last week they'd still been automated, now just dead air. Either the satellites failed, or the operators were finally done pretending someone was listening. I boiled water just to feel useful, though there was nothing to make with it. My last coffee packet had gone on day 6. I used a cracked mug I'd found under the lounge cushions and sat outside, bare feet against the fiberglass, watching the sun start to drop. I noticed something bobbing on the horizon, too distant to make out clearly. I checked it twice through binoculars. Round, low in the water. Could have been another drift buoy, or a dead seal, or worse. I logged its location mentally, then turned away. I couldn't deal with another raft. That night, I locked up again, left the shotgun out of reach on purpose, forced myself to sleep in the aft cabin instead of on the floor, even if it made me feel exposed. I woke 3 times to creaks, which could have been the hull adjusting or just nerves. On the 4th time, I sat up and didn't move. Something had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but real. I didn't go for the hatch. I didn't even check the bilge. I went outside instead, scanning the water, trying to calm down. That's when I saw it. The thing from earlier, the shape on the horizon. It was closer now, much closer, maybe a few 100 feet away, still drifting, still low in the water. And now I could see it was not a raft. It was a body, but upright, floating with its head above water, back hunched, arms hanging. Not treading, not swimming, just suspended, like it was caught on something, but there was nothing visible beneath it. No life vest, no tether, no motion. But it stayed vertical. I stared for nearly 5 minutes without blinking, waiting for it to move. It didn't. I thought about using the spotlight, but didn't want to draw more attention. I grabbed the flashlight instead and clicked it on once, then off. No reaction. I did it again. Still nothing. Then I saw its jaw move. Just a twitch. I backed into the cabin and shut the door. Didn't lock it. Didn't arm myself. Just sat on the floor trying to decide if I'd imagined the whole thing. After 10 minutes, I went back out. It was gone. I slept badly after that. The kind of half-sleep where you dream about the place you're actually in, only slightly off. Like you're watching yourself sit up while your body stays still. I kept waking in false starts. Kept thinking I saw water on the floor, heard whispering under the deck. It was like I was slipping into fever, but my temperature held, pulse steady, skin dry. I didn't think I was infected, just worn out. Next morning, I opened the bilge again. I had to. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. The body was still there, still wrapped, still silent. I forced myself to touch it, check for warmth, movement, decomposition. Nothing. Just cold, stiff plastic. I unwrapped the head again to be sure. No change. No fresh bruises. The eye had started to collapse, but there were no signs of bloating or twitch reflex. I closed it up again and sat on the floor until my legs went numb. That afternoon, I ran out of fresh water. I tested the emergency diesel rig using a steel pan, a cup, and a sheet of clear plastic I'd salvaged from the galley window. I boiled seawater in the pan, suspended the plastic above it with tension from some leftover fishing line, and let the condensation drip into the cup. It took over an hour to get 2 ounces. I tasted it. Clean, but hot. Not enough. I needed a better system, or I'd collapse within 3 days. I took inventory again, hoping I'd missed a sealed bottle or something tucked into the hull liner. Nothing. By day 16, I couldn't stop seeing things in the water. Every dark shape looked like a body. Every shimmer looked like a hand breaking the surface. I started logging their position, convinced I'd find a pattern. I didn't. They never showed up in the same place twice. Sometimes I blinked and they were gone. Once, I saw a full face beneath the surface. Nose just breaking the waterline, mouth barely open. I stared until the sun made me look away. When I looked back, the face was gone. I stopped sleeping, ate cold crackers in the dark. I'd rationed for 5 days, made it stretch to 9. Now every hour felt like a decision point. Stay and hope for rain, or fire up the engine and head towards shore. But the last thing I wanted was to run out of fuel halfway and drift back toward whatever coastline was still burning. If the cities were gone, the roads weren't any better. I had one last gamble. Head for the chain of barrier islands I'd marked on the old laminated chart stuck behind the helm. If even one of them had a stream or a rain catch, I'd be set. If not, I'd die out there just the same. At first light, I started the engine and watched the fuel gauge drop a few ticks just from priming. No full tank to gamble with, probably less than a third left. I kept the throttle low, nose angled southeast. I picked the largest island with elevation lines marked in thick ink, the one that had a weather station pre-outbreak. I figured if anything survived out there, even a broken cistern or a sun-faded plastic tank, I'd have a shot. I used the handheld compass since the nav system hadn't booted in days. Still dead from battery loss. The yacht drifted east with the tide for a while before the engine stabilized. Every vibration underfoot made me think the hull was about to split open. I kept the bilge pump switch flipped off. If it failed now, and the alarm started beeping, it'd drain what little power I had left and alert anyone in earshot. That kind of noise traveled farther than people realized. At sea, sound skips, bounces. You can't control where it lands. By late morning, I saw the outline of the first island. Nothing lush, just scrub brush, sand ridges, and what looked like an old ranger shack near the edge of the tree line. No boats docked, no bodies visible, no plumes of smoke. I cut the engine early and drifted in the last quarter mile, trying not to leave a wake. I knew the infected could swim short bursts, or at least float long enough to cause problems. I didn't want to draw anything that might still be drifting around with open eyes and lungs full of brine. I anchored in 8 feet of water and used the small inflatable tender to make the final approach. It had a slow leak, but still held air long enough to get ashore if I didn't waste time. I brought only what I needed: the shotgun, the filter bottle, and 2 empty jugs. I strapped one of the jugs to my back with a length of salvaged dock line and paddled low, trying to keep my body from silhouetting against the glare. When I landed, I didn't wait. I dragged the raft up far enough to avoid drift and moved straight for the shack. The place was abandoned, just like everything else. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, but the catchment barrel was still intact and had a trickle of water inside, filtered through a cracked mesh gutter. I siphoned what I could, less than half a gallon, but cleaner than anything I'd touched in days. It was warm, full of tannins, and tasted like algae, but I drank a quarter of it right there. I didn't stop until I felt it hit my gut hard enough to make me sit down. Around the back of the shack, I found a wire pen and the remains of an old weather station tower. The electronics had been stripped. I recognized the marks. Not looters, just time, wind erosion, salt. There wasn't a fresh footprint anywhere in the sand. No signs of raiders, no traps. But something still felt wrong. The silence wasn't like on the water. It was heavier. I noticed it after a few minutes, the complete absence of birds. I searched the tree line but didn't go in. The scrub was too tight, and I didn't know what was nesting in there now. I'd read enough survival blogs before the outbreak to know how quickly small islands could go sideways. Introduce one infected, and with nowhere for people to run, the whole population collapses in days. It becomes a trap, a sealed room with no exit and plenty of meat. If the virus got here, it either wiped the place clean or something was still in there waiting. Either way, I wasn't staying long. I filled the second jug, refilled my filter bottle, and double-checked the shack for anything useful. A rusted hatchet, a broken oar, a coil of frayed paracord. I took the cord and left the rest. On the way back to the raft, I saw prints in the wet sand. Not mine, not fresh, but recent enough that they hadn't blown over yet. Barefoot, narrow heel strike. Not child-sized, but not adult male either. I backed away slow, shotgun still slung but ready. I didn't call out, didn't ask if anyone was there. The days of shouting to strangers were over. If someone was hiding, they'd either stay that way or they'd come out swinging. I watched the tree line for movement while I dragged the raft back to the edge and launched without turning my back fully. Made it to the water without a sound. Paddled hard and fast. Didn't stop until I hit the side of the yacht and clipped the line back to the cleat. I stayed outside for a while, crouched near the swim platform, watching the island. Nothing moved. No one followed. Maybe whoever made those prints was already gone. Maybe they were watching from the trees. Or maybe they'd never left, and I just missed something buried under the silence. That night, I marked the island on my chart with a red X and wrote the word unclean next to it. I knew it was superstitious. The virus didn't care about symbols, but it helped. Made things feel more manageable, gave shape to choices. A red X meant I didn't go back. With water replenished, I started rationing again. A little more breathing room, enough for a few days. I used the new cord to reinforce one of the hatch latches and rigged a tension trap to the forward bilge, just in case. A piece of string tied to a fork I stuck between the floorboards. Nothing fancy, just something that would fall if the hatch moved. I needed a line between paranoia and reality, and that was the best I could do without spiraling again. The next 2 days passed without incident. I drifted further south, keeping the shore just barely in view, close enough to spot landmarks, far enough that I couldn't be seen without optics. I saw smoke once, miles inland, but it didn't rise fast enough to mean fire, probably a camp, or something worse. I steered away. There were fewer bodies in the water now. Maybe because the current had shifted, maybe because most of them had already sunk. The ones I did see looked older, bloated, skin peeling, mouths open but quiet. No movement, no swimmers. On the evening of day 21, I spotted another vessel. It wasn't a yacht, more like a houseboat or a repurposed barge. Low in the water, half covered in tarps, and moving without lights. I killed my engine immediately and coasted behind a swell line, watching through binoculars. The boat wasn't drifting, it was motoring slow, deliberate. I saw figures on deck, at least 3, all armed, 2 rifles, one with a bat or crowbar, no markings, no attempts to signal, just scanning. One of them used binoculars, sweeping side to side. I dropped below the railing and held my breath. They passed within 500 feet and didn't alter course. I waited a full hour before moving again. I didn't light anything, didn't make food, just sat on the floor with the shotgun again, wondering if they'd seen the yacht and just didn't care, or if they'd come back later when it was darker. That was the first time I considered scuttling the vessel. Not because it was damaged, not because I hated it, but because I didn't want anyone else getting it if I died. I made a short list of ways I could sabotage it without ruining my own chances. Hide the keys, disconnect the starter, drain the fuel lines. Nothing that couldn't be undone, but enough to slow someone down. I didn't do any of it yet, just thought it through. The yacht had become part of me by then. Every inch of it, every sound it made, every creak in the deck or vibration in the rudder post was familiar. That was the problem. Familiarity made the irregularities easier to spot. On the morning of day 22, I found a fresh footprint on the fiberglass walkway beside the helm. Barefoot, damp. The heel had smeared slightly in a direction that made no sense, like someone had stepped wrong trying to crouch or twist around. I hadn't been up there barefoot in days. I spent 3 hours tearing the cabin apart after that. Not because I thought someone was hiding inside. I would have seen the signs. But because I needed to make sure nothing had been moved. I opened every drawer, checked every locker, lifted every seat. I traced my own footprints in dust and mildew, made mental notes about what looked disturbed. The tinned food I'd stashed in a dry bag under the bed was still there. Same count. The shotgun shells were still in their taped boxes. But something had shifted. I just couldn't prove it. That night, I found one of the bolts on the bilge hatch sitting a quarter turn loose. Could have been heat expansion, could have been movement from the swell, or it could have been something worse. I tightened it with a socket wrench, double-checked the trap string, and moved the sealed duffel with the emergency rations into the aft cabin. I didn't want it near the corpse anymore. The man wrapped in plastic hadn't moved, not as far as I could tell, but that didn't mean much. Dead things didn't stay dead in this world, not until you made sure they were emptied out. On day 23, I picked up something on the radio. It was weak, barely audible. I had to turn the dial 0.5 millimeter at a time to hold the frequency. A woman's voice, broken and clipped. She repeated a string of numbers twice. Then the words, safe water, and 27 nautical miles southeast of barrier marker 7. Then, silence. No call sign, no date. Just a short loop and dead air. I marked it down, cross-referenced it with the chart, and found a deep cove tucked behind 2 narrow ridgelines. It could be a real signal. It could also be bait. I left the radio on for 3 more hours. No repeat, no chatter. I considered responding, but didn't. If it was bait, I'd just be confirming I was alive. I needed more than a promise before I used fuel I couldn't afford to waste. I wrote it down on the back of a water jug label and tacked it to the helm console. 27 nanometers SE, safe water. A question mark helped, made it feel like a choice, not a certainty. By sunset, I'd convinced myself to wait. If the signal repeated overnight, I'd consider heading that way. If not, I'd treat it like all the other lies people told over open frequencies in those early days. People had used the word safe like it meant something. It didn't. Safe meant alive long enough to regret trusting the wrong person. On day 24, I found the main breaker switch halfway tripped. I hadn't touched it. It wasn't wind. The switch required force, a click you could feel in your palm. I flipped it back, checked every connected system, the bilge monitor, the navigation panel, the water pump, all still technically working. But the voltage monitor was wrong. Too high, then too low. Then it spiked and settled. The batteries weren't behaving right. I checked the connectors and found the corrosion had spread farther than expected. Nothing I couldn't clean up, but it meant that at some point seawater had gotten deeper into the housing than I thought. I spent the better part of the afternoon stripping cables and recrimping ends with the only set of tools I had left. My hands blistered. I sliced one knuckle open on a sharp corner and had to wrap it with the last of my gauze. I didn't even notice the blood dripping onto the engine cover until I saw flies starting to gather. That night, I finally acted on the sabotage plan. I pulled the ignition key and wedged it into the base of a sealed light fixture above the galley. Then I took a second key, one I'd carved from aluminum using a broken zipper tab, and left that one in the console. It wouldn't work, not fully. It'd jam if someone tried to crank too hard, just enough to make them think it was still functional. I left the fuel line connected but tied a safety shutoff under the aft bench, reachable only if you knew where to grope. None of it was perfect, but it'd slow someone down. Maybe enough for me to respond if I was still alive to hear them try. Day 25. No wind. Water perfectly flat. The sun came up red. I woke up feeling wrong. Not sick, just off. I couldn't place it until I walked past the bilge panel and saw the trap string had fallen. The fork I'd wedged into the deck groove was on its side. I dropped to my knees and opened the hatch again. The body was still there, still wrapped, but the position had changed, slightly. The shoulders were slumped differently. The plastic had shifted on one side. There was no way to be sure, but I felt it, like something had moved when I wasn't looking. I closed the hatch slowly and reset the trap, changed the angle, tied a second piece of line to a can that would rattle if it fell. That wasn't for security anymore. That was for me, for my mind. I didn't eat that day. Couldn't. I sat in the main cabin, drinking warm water and staring at the floor, listening for movement. I thought about the emergency signal again. The woman's voice, the location, the phrase, safe water. It sounded different now, more rehearsed, like a loop, not a real broadcast. Like someone had recorded it in a bunker and left it running just to see who'd come knocking. When dusk hit, I walked the deck one more time and saw something new. A flare cap. Just the rubberized twist-off end of a handheld marine flare stuck in the corner of the starboard side rail. I hadn't used one. The only flares I had were still sealed in the emergency kit. This one didn't match. Different color, slightly different size. It hadn't been there before. No wind could have carried it there. No wave had broken over the deck. It was placed. I checked the entire rail. Every access hatch, every locker, nothing else was missing, nothing else added. But the flare cap was real. I held it for a long time, turning it over, trying to figure out if it had any markings. There were initials scratched into the side. EJ, I didn't know anyone with those initials. Not anymore. That night, I sat up top with the flare gun loaded and the shotgun beside me, watching the water for any hint of light or sound. It was the kind of night where everything goes still. No wind, no birds, not even the soft lapping of waves. Just black water and the hum of systems running on borrowed charge. Just before midnight, the emergency signal came back. Same woman's voice, same phrase. Safe water, 27 nautical miles southeast of barrier marker 7. Repeating once, then static. Only this time, it wasn't just a clean loop. In the background, I heard breathing. No words. Just air moving too close to a microphone. Not a glitch, not wind. It was human. Timed wrong for a recording. Too soft to be anything but live. I turned the radio off and didn't touch it again until sunrise. There was no sleep in between. I sat in the wheelhouse with the flare gun in my lap, shotgun against the bulkhead, eyes half focused on the glass. Every noise made me flinch. Every groan of fiberglass made me look back at the bilge. The trap string was still up, but I didn't trust it anymore. I didn't trust much of anything. When morning came, I ate 2 bites of dried fruit and drank half a cup of water. I washed my face using a rag and a few drops from the solar shower. The water smelled like mildew and rubber, but it helped. I kept thinking clearer after cleaning up, even if I still didn't feel like myself. I knew what was happening. I'd been alone too long, too much stress, too much paranoia. The human mind doesn't do well without real interaction. The brain starts filling in gaps, hearing sounds that aren't there, seeing shapes out of reflections, smelling things that trigger fear, even when there's no source. I told myself the breathing was part of that, but I knew I was lying. The signal had changed. That meant someone was still alive on the other end. Maybe just one person, maybe several. Maybe they were waiting for a response and were too afraid to speak first. Maybe they were just testing how long someone like me would listen. Either way, I had a decision to make. Respond, ignore it, or sail there blind. I picked the third option. I figured if I kept the transmitter off, stayed quiet, and just approached slow, I could assess from a distance. No radio pings, no lights, no signature. If it was a trap, I could drift out of sight before they saw me. If it wasn't, if the signal was real, then maybe I'd find water, food, or even working equipment. I didn't let myself think about meeting a friendly face. That kind of hope was corrosive. It made people stupid. I prepped the yacht for travel again, stripped the deck of loose gear, rechecked the emergency fuel cache. Still 3 cans tied off in the forward storage locker, enough for another 50 miles at low throttle. I patched a leak in the inflatable raft with heat tape and marine glue, just in case I needed to come ashore quietly. Then I marked the coordinates and plotted a straight line using compass bearings. I waited until early afternoon, filled my bottles, and started moving. The trip took 4 hours. I stayed under 10 knots. Fuel efficiency mattered more than speed. I cut the motor every 30 minutes and drifted for a bit to cool the engine and reduce my audible signature. I kept the radio on, but turned the volume all the way down, just enough to monitor signal changes. The breathing came back once, short, rhythmic, a single breath every 5 seconds, then stopped again. No voice, no words, just the ghost of someone who might have been there. As I closed in on the coordinate range, I spotted the cove. It was narrow, steep-walled, with limestone ridges that made radar nearly useless. I had to rely on sight. I cut the engine again and let the current carry me inside. The entrance was calm, but there was evidence of past storms. Driftwood packed into the rocks, torn canvas wrapped around a tree limb 20 feet up. The kind of mess left behind when people try to build something and fail. I didn't see any boats at first. Then, tucked into the shadows under a leaning outcrop, I saw a small fishing vessel, blue hull, twin outboards, covered in netting and half submerged, but not entirely gone. Someone had beached it on purpose. Whether they'd ever left was a different question. I dropped anchor just outside the narrow bend in the inlet, close enough to react, far enough not to be ambushed. The radio gave one more static burst, then cut out entirely. No voice, no breath, nothing. I waited an hour, no movement. Then I saw it. A glint of light at the top of the ridge. Not fire, not a flashlight, just a momentary reflection, like sun on glass or a mirror angled wrong. I crouched low on the stern and glassed the area with my binoculars. The terrain was uneven. A narrow footpath led up toward the crest. I couldn't see anyone. Could have been a solar panel. Could have been a scope. I stayed still and watched. 10 minutes. No repeat. I geared up, took the raft, brought only one bottle, the shotgun, and a flare gun in case I had to signal myself. I paddled in slow, aiming for a sheltered landing area below the ridge. Every stroke was measured. I kept the oars close to the waterline. No noise, no silhouette. I landed under a collapsed dock and tied off. Waited 5 minutes. Still nothing. No bugs, no birds. The kind of quiet that made your ears buzz. I climbed the ridge by foot, slowly, step by step. The shotgun stayed slung across my back, but my hand was never far from the grip. The path was narrow and washed out in places. Somebody had used it before. The dirt had compacted edges, and a few flat stones were clearly arranged to help with footing. I crested the top and found a flat clearing with stacked driftwood, an old tent frame, and a steel antenna lashed to a post with electrical tape. A car battery sat in a crate at the base, dead, but still wired in. There was a tarp spread out nearby, and beneath it, someone's camp. Or what was left of it. No body, no blood, but clear signs of panic. A backpack dumped and half burned, water bottles slashed open with a blade, food wrappers stomped into the ground, and under the pile of driftwood, what looked like a makeshift bed, blankets soaked through, smeared with dirt and what might have been vomit. The air stank of bile and old sweat, not old like weeks, old like hours. Whoever had been here was either dead or very close to it. I found a spiral notebook inside a dry bag under a loose plank. It was mostly blank except for the last page, which read, "Kept it down there, wrapped it, still breathing." That was all. I checked for signs of movement nearby. Saw none. Just the ocean, still as glass below me. I didn't go back down the path. I made a wide circle and descended along the opposite ridge, skidding half the way down on loose dirt and scrub. I was back at the raft within 20 minutes and rowing hard for the yacht. I didn't relax until I climbed back on deck and pulled the raft up after me. I didn't sleep. I sat in the wheelhouse and read the notebook again. I didn't like what it implied. Still breathing. Not alive. Not cured. Not even stable. Just breathing. That phrase matched the one in the raft journal I'd found earlier, the one that said the man stayed quiet for 2 days after dying. Whoever was broadcasting this signal had been part of something larger, or they'd stumbled across the same kind of experiment, a test, a study, or just someone too scared to put a thing down even after it stopped being human. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in my bilge wasn't the only one, that maybe he was part of a chain, a sequence, like a control group passed around from hand to hand by people who couldn't accept what the virus actually was. The cold truth was that something had been changing in the infected, slower onset in some, delayed reanimation in others. I'd heard the rumors before, people dying but staying warm for hours, not turning until the second or third day. Everyone brushed it off at first. Bad memory, shock, fear making people think they saw what they didn't. But now I had 2 notebooks, 2 locations, 2 phrases, still breathing. Stayed quiet for 2 days. Neither was comforting. I started avoiding the bilge completely after that. Not out of laziness. I knew how dangerous that kind of neglect could be. I just couldn't bring myself to open it again. Every time I passed it, I felt the pressure of it under the floorboards. Not a sound, not movement, just weight. The psychological mass of something sealed, dangerous, unknown. Something I should have dumped overboard weeks ago. But I didn't, because some part of me still thought it mattered. Maybe it was the leftover logic from the old world. Evidence, accountability, truth. I used to believe in that. Information should be preserved, even when it's awful, even when it hurts. That was a mistake. Out here, the only thing information does is gnaw at you until your survival instinct starts to erode. I was close to that point now. 1 bad day away. Day 26. The batteries dropped to critical. The solar input wasn't keeping up. Either corrosion had eaten the cable lines or one of the panels had cracked. I climbed up top to check, found salt crust jammed into the frame, and realized the seals had rotted out. I'd covered them during storms, but not well enough. They weren't marine grade, probably added aftermarket by whoever owned the yacht before all this started. The bilge pump failed first, then the water pressure system dropped out. Then the inverter started flickering, and I lost all galley outlets. I could still start the engine manually and reroute power through the alternator, but that meant burning fuel I didn't have. It was a slow death spiral. Every fix cost something I couldn't replace. Every problem exposed a new one. I started tracking what systems I could do without and which ones had to stay functional. Lights, optional. I had headlamps, water pressure. I could siphon manually. Radio, I'd keep it off except at night. But power to the refrigerator compartment had to stay live. Not for food, that was long gone, but because I had some antibiotics left, and the heat had already spoiled 2 packets of rehydration salts I'd been holding onto since May. If I got sick now, there'd be no backup. If I got injured, I'd die from a cut. Day 27, I started hearing the dripping. At first, I thought it was condensation, but it didn't match the rhythm of the swell. The sound came from below, deep in the hull, and it was too wet to ignore. I traced it to the bilge again. The trap string hadn't fallen. The can I'd tied to the floorboard hadn't moved, but the hatch edge was damp, not from external water. The weather had been dry. No waves had broken deck level. I unscrewed the panel halfway, waited. Nothing came out. I didn't open it all the way. Couldn't. I cleaned the edge, resealed it, and wrapped a towel around the base to track moisture. If it soaked through again, I'd have to make a decision. One I'd been putting off for too long. Later that day, I found something floating half a mile off the port side. A red tarp, knotted in the middle, drifting slow on the current. I grabbed the binoculars. The tarp moved strangely, not like it was empty, not like it was caught on anything. It was too heavy for just gear. It bumped with the swells but didn't sink. I scanned again. That's when I saw a hand. Pale, still, tangled in the edge of the tarp's binding cord. I almost looked away. Then I saw the wrist move. Just a twitch, enough to ripple the water. I dropped the glasses and backed away from the rail. I didn't take the boat out to check. I didn't need confirmation. I'd seen it enough times to know what I was looking at. Someone had sealed another infected into a tarp, probably alive, maybe already dead, but not finished, and instead of burning it or shooting it or anchoring it, they just tossed it overboard. That was the 3rd containment I'd found, the 3rd half measure, and every one of them matched. Wrapped, sealed, breathing. I spent the night trying to sleep, but my ears wouldn't let me. I kept thinking I heard the plastic shifting under the floorboards. Not violent, not a knock, just movement. A subtle change in tension. Maybe it was the water dripping. Maybe it was the tarp swaying in the swells below. Maybe it was inside the hull. I didn't check. Not because I was afraid, because I already knew. On the morning of day 28, I wrote a list of options in grease pencil on the side window next to the helm. It was the only clean surface left that I hadn't covered in notes or inventory. The list had 3 items. Dump the body, burn it in a drum, wait. I stared at the 3rd option the longest. I knew what wait meant. It meant keep pretending I had time, that someone might explain all of it later, that if I held on long enough, a voice would come through the radio and tell me why people kept sealing the infected instead of destroying them. But I knew that voice wasn't coming. That night the wind shifted. A storm rolled in from the west. Not a big one, but enough to churn the surface and start slapping the hull in odd rhythms. I tied down the inflatable raft, sealed the hatches, and checked the forward anchor chain, still holding. I sat in the wheelhouse watching the waves, shotgun across my knees, and waited for something to happen. Around midnight, I felt it. Not sound, not sight, just presence. Something shifted below. The hatch cover flexed under my feet. Just once, like something inside had stretched. Not a knock, not a bang, just weight against the underside of the panel. I froze, watched the can on the trapline sway. It didn't fall, but it moved enough to prove I wasn't imagining it. I stayed perfectly still for nearly a minute, listening, feeling, trying to detect the slightest tremor underfoot. The boat creaked the way it always did in bad weather, but my legs were locked, and I knew the difference between normal movement and something unnatural. The weight wasn't coming from the swell, it was coming from the bilge. I lowered myself slowly and rested both palms on the hatch panel again. It was warm, warmer than the air above it, and not evenly. One side of the panel felt tight, like it was under stress. I couldn't feel motion anymore, but the memory of it was in the metal. Something inside had pushed against the frame. I checked the bolts. All 4 were still in place. The seal hadn't cracked, but I could see sweat condensed around the outer ring, moisture gathering where there shouldn't be any. It hadn't rained hard. The heat was internal. I backed off and grabbed the shotgun. I didn't open the hatch. I didn't break the seal. I just sat 5 feet away, weapon leveled, and waited for it to happen again. It didn't. Not that hour, not the next. The storm pushed on. Wind carried spray across the deck. The yacht creaked and settled. By dawn, the weather broke, and I was still sitting there, dry-eyed and half numb from tension. The hatch never moved again, but I didn't believe it had stopped. I believed it had learned. Day 29, I boiled the last of the desalinated water and choked down half a cup of rice and rehydrated fish powder. I checked the radio. No new signals. No more breathing. Just static and dead space. The signal from the cove had vanished completely. Someone had turned it off or run out of power. I never got a name. Never got a real message. Just coordinates. Old notebooks. And a man sealed in plastic who now pushed on the walls of the only safe place I had left. I didn't sleep that night. I stripped the deck of everything that could be thrown overboard, cleared the raft, checked the lashing on the emergency fuel cans, recounted the flare rounds. 3 left. I tied one to the rail in case I needed a distraction later. I kept imagining scenarios. What if I dumped the body now and it surfaced again? What if someone else found it and pulled it aboard, the same way I had? What if it wasn't dead at all, just dormant? Whatever dormant meant with this infection. By early morning, the decision was made. I was going to open the hatch. I wasn't going to do it alone. I tied the aft bench cushions into a makeshift barricade in front of the cabin door, duct taped a small mirror to a mop handle so I could see inside the bilge before reaching in. I pulled the fire blanket from the galley and positioned it nearby in case the thing moved and I had to smother it. I laid out a short pry bar, the flare gun, and the shotgun. I checked the shells. 2 slugs chambered. No spread. No mistakes. I kept the engine off. Let the silence settle. Then I loosened the bolts. 1 by 1, 4 of them. Each groaned slightly as I turned them, but none were stripped. The hatch stayed sealed by the weight of the lid and whatever tension had built underneath. I didn't lift it immediately. I slid the mirror down first and angled it to reflect the interior. It was dark, foggy with moisture, but I could see the outline of the body bag, just where I'd left it, still zipped, still sealed, but bulging slightly. The plastic wrap around the head had fogged, condensation from breath. I couldn't deny it anymore. It was breathing. I sat back, pulled the mirror out, and held it in my lap. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't a dead man. This wasn't a cadaver. It wasn't even a reanimated corpse in the usual sense. Something was in stasis, like the virus had slowed its process to a crawl, a new stage, maybe the next one. I stared at the shotgun. My instinct was to shoot, not out of panic, out of logic. Eliminate the threat, dump the pieces, clean the bilge. But some part of me wouldn't let go of the idea that if I destroyed this, I might be destroying the last proof of what the virus really did. Every encounter I'd had with the infected before this had been immediate, loud, brutal, obvious. This one had been subtle, controlled. If that was evolving, then we were in more danger than anyone realized. I resealed the hatch without opening it all the way, rebolted it, retied the trap string, but I moved the shotgun next to it this time. I left the flare gun loaded and within reach. Then I wrote something on the inside of the hull with a grease pen, just in case someone else found the yacht later. Do not open. It breathes. It waits. Day 30. Another boat approached. Not a yacht, not military. A long aluminum hull with twin engines painted in matte grey. Fast, shallow draft. No flags. No lights. I spotted it through binoculars before it crossed into visual range. The bow cut through the water clean. No wake lights. No radio pings. Just speed and silence. I didn't move. Didn't signal. I stayed low in the cabin and killed all power. I could have fired up the engine and run. I could have dropped anchor and pretended to be dead in the water. I did neither. I just sat there, watching, waiting. They didn't come straight at me. They passed wide, maybe 400 yards off. 2 people on board. One driving, one scanning the horizon. Both wore dark clothes, no markings. The one scanning had optics. I saw the scope glint once. I dropped low after that. They didn't change course. They didn't stop, didn't call out, didn't loop back. I stayed hidden in the cabin for another hour, ears tuned to every distant sound, listening for the rumble of their engines returning. Nothing, just water and wind. I waited until I was sure they were gone, then crept up and swept the deck. That's when I found the bottle tied to the stern rail with fishing line. The message inside was short. No name, just one sentence. If it's breathing, it's learning. I stared at the note for a long time, trying to convince myself it didn't mean what I thought it meant. Maybe it was a warning, maybe a threat, maybe just someone else who knew about the slow burn version of the infection and left me a breadcrumb. But the implication was clear. I wasn't the only one keeping something sealed and breathing. Someone else had seen it, maybe even studied it, and now they were watching people like me to see what we'd do next. Day 31. I didn't touch the bilge. I didn't check the trap line. I didn't unbolt anything or adjust the tension seal. I just watched the floor, waited. If it moved again, I'd know. If it didn't, I wasn't going to provoke it. I spent the day running inventory again, even though I'd done it twice already. Food was down to 2 partial bags of rice, 1 can of old soup I'd been saving for emergencies, and a half-empty bottle of electrolyte powder that had started to clump. Water was even worse. I'd gotten maybe 1 more gallon from the last trickle of my distillation setup, but the clear sheeting was showing UV damage, cracks forming near the corner seams. 1 more day of sun and I'd lose pressure retention. I cleaned every filter cartridge, even the busted one, hoping to squeeze a little more life out of it. The hand pump still worked, but each cycle took more strength than I could afford to waste. I skipped food that day. Just drank, if you could call it that. 4 sips every 6 hours, no salt added. I'd already started shrinking in my clothes. My belt was useless. I tied it tight with cord and looped it behind my back just to keep my pants up. By day 33, the trap line had moved again. Not fallen, not broken, just shifted angle. I hadn't touched it. There was no storm, no significant chop, no animals on board. That meant the panel had flexed again, and still I left it shut. That same night, I got another signal on the radio. It wasn't a voice, not a loop, not the original woman with the safe water message. Just static for 10 seconds, followed by a long digital tone. Not a normal marine tone, not Morse, then silence, like someone testing a connection. I turned off the radio immediately and unplugged the power line from the battery post. I wasn't going to let them triangulate me, not when I knew I was being watched. On day 34, I started prepping for evacuation. Not escape. I wasn't under attack, but I couldn't stay. The yacht had given me a month of life, but the systems were failing. The panels couldn't hold charge. The batteries were decaying. The bilge was compromised. And something inside the boat, inside the corpse, had stopped acting like a dead thing. I moved the raft to the waterline and started prepping an abandon plan. Took my 2 best jugs of water, the last 3 shotgun shells, 1 flare gun, the mirror, the map, and both notebooks. I tore out the blank pages to save weight. I wrote a last entry in one of them. This vessel is not safe. If you find it, stay above deck. Do not access the forward bilge. Do not attempt to salvage below. I taped that page to the inside of the cabin door with electrical tape. Then I went back inside, sat in the wheelhouse, and waited through the night. I didn't launch. Not yet. I didn't want to paddle blind into open water and risk landing on the wrong island. Or worse, being seen by the boat that left me that message. They were still out there, and if they'd gotten close enough to leave a bottle tied to my stern without making a sound, they could have done worse. Day 35, I made my choice. I dumped the body. Not alive, not moving, but not dead either. It wasn't showing visible decay. The skin had turned tight and pale, but the joints were still flexible. The chest had movement, slow, uneven rise and fall. I opened the bilge only long enough to confirm nothing had changed. then slid a rope around the bag and dragged it to the deck. It left a trail of condensation behind it. Not blood, just wet. I tied a kettlebell to the feet and rolled it overboard in silence. No ceremony, no words. I watched it sink. It didn't struggle, didn't twitch, just dropped beneath the surface and vanished. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel regret, just tired. I resealed the bilge, taped over the edges, and wrote "ejected" across the lid in grease pencil. Then I poured bleach across the hatch, rinsed with what little clean water I had left, and aired out the cabin. That night, I saw a fire on the horizon. Not huge, not a building, just a campfire. Someone was out there, less than 10 miles east, probably on one of the barrier islands. I marked the location and debated going toward it, but I waited. Day 36, I turned the yacht east. I didn't fire up the main engine. I just drifted with the tide and used the solar-charged trolling motor I'd wired into the rudder casing. It wasn't meant for propulsion, just maneuvering, but it was silent. I moved slow, maybe a knot and a half, but that was enough. The firelight never moved. I watched it grow, then fade slightly with the angle of the shoreline. By the time I was a mile out, I cut the motor and floated in. I never saw who built the fire, but I saw the shapes left behind. 3 bedrolls, 1 lean-to, and 2 long planks used for drying something over the coals. No people, no prints, no blood, just fresh embers and the faint smell of cooked crab. I didn't land. I wasn't desperate enough yet, but I marked the beach as occupied on my chart and floated back out. That night the sky stayed clear. I caught rain for the first time in 4 days. 2 quarts, enough to last another night. Days 37 through 40 blended together. I rationed what I could, watched the horizon, patched the raft, adjusted the sails, even though they barely held tension. I checked the bilge once a day to confirm it was still dry, still sealed, still empty. On day 41, I saw a sail on the southern horizon. White canvas, moving clean, not a ghost, a real boat. I raised the mirror and flashed it once, then twice. No response. They either didn't see me, didn't care, or had their own reasons to keep going. I didn't signal again. Day 42, I caught a fish in a plastic bucket rigged with line and broken biscuits. First fish in weeks. I cooked it on a fireplate in the galley and ate it over cold rice. That night, I dreamed of stairs. Endless ones. Going up, not down. Days 43 through 45, I heard nothing on the radio, but I started broadcasting short signals of my own, just static bursts at low power, 3 times a day. Not a call for help, just presence. If anyone was scanning, they'd know I was out here. On day 46, someone answered. Not with words, just a burst pattern, 1 long, 3 short, 1 long. I replied in kind. We did that 5 times. No one spoke. It wasn't Morse, it was acknowledgement. The boat never came, the voice never followed, but I logged the exchange. And that's where I've stayed, floating, drifting between decisions, between shorelines, between the people who might still be good and the ones who stopped pretending, between a corpse that breathed and a sea that never asks why. It's been 90 days since I found this yacht. I've made it farther than I thought I would, longer than I probably should have. I haven't seen another infected in over 2 weeks, but I still feel it. Not in my blood, in the quiet, in the changes I saw, in the people who left notes instead of answers. I don't know what this virus really is anymore. I don't know if the dead learn. I just know that the ones who breathe after they die, they wait. And I don't think they wait alone. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership: Carlos Herrera, Dominique Johnson, The Great Anywho, Jade Allah, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell, TJR, Baby Doll. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.